is, as we said at the beginning, this is also an event to launch our resource book, Menstrual Hygiene Matters. And I'm delighted to be here with co-authors Sue and Sarah to be here tonight to do that. And this publication, and we'll have copies downstairs to share and for you to look at, is the output from an ongoing collaboration between WaterAid and Share on menstrual hygiene. And we started with a roundtable meeting in 2010 to look at what are some of the knowledge gaps around menstrual hygiene. And although we thought that there's definitely a case for more research and evidence, actually a lot of people have been working on menstrual hygiene, and there are also a lot of organisations and individuals who've realised its importance and want to do something about it. But the information, particularly practical aspects, is not easily available to those who want to take it up. So that's what we set out to address with this. And when Sue and Sarah and I started to cast out the net, we were actually amazed at how much inspirational material and experience was out there scattered across the globe. And this became a very global collaboration very quickly. And we had really amazing inputs from so many people, either contributing materials, experiences, reviewing the resource book, and also we have 17 co-publishers who came on board. So what we have is a very comprehensive book. It's quite a substantial publication, but it's set out in modules, so you don't have to read it cover to cover. There are 9 modules, and the first 2 consist of introductory information, so the basics about menstruation, about menstrual hygiene. Menstrual hygiene and health. And the second one is how we can get started on this. What are the interventions that are possible at different levels and by different sectors? And how can we build the competence and confidence of people to actually take up this issue in the first place? We then look at menstrual hygiene interventions and what are the possibilities in different settings. So we look at menstrual hygiene in the community, at school, in emergency contexts, working with women and girls in particularly vulnerable situations, and research and advocacy on menstrual hygiene. And then for each module, there's an accompanying toolkit which has a lot more in-depth information as well, technical designs and so on. So I just want to talk a little bit more in-depth on some of the information that's contained in the resource book, and that which is particularly relevant to this evening's event. So the challenges that you can understand here from the quotes, very similar, as I say, common experiences across countries and cultures to those that have already been raised by Rose and others this evening. But I think, as well as thinking about the personal experiences of women and girls, these also highlight the importance of the issue to us as WASH professionals, or to the gender sector, and how it impacts on our work. So the first one, again, raises the issue Helen mentioned, which is during menstruation, women and girls may not actually use facilities even if they've been provided because of the stigma and taboos around it. And the second one relates to the practice of chapadi, and it highlights again the physical and psychological risks that women and girls are open to because of the stigma and taboos. These 2 quotes as well really highlight some of the experiences of girls at school, and the importance not just of facilities, but of having information and support in place so that girls have a positive experience of school and don't need to leave during menstruation. Now, we also looked at the links between menstrual hygiene and health, and this is something that's often cited but on which there's very little evidence, particularly the links between menstrual hygiene or poor menstrual hygiene and the risk of infection, reproductive tract infections, urinary tract infections, But there is a very plausible link during menstruation that the risk might be higher because the mucus that covers the cervix dissolves during menstruation to allow the blood out. So if women are unable to use clean materials, or they're having to reuse materials, or they don't know the way to use pads, for example, inserting them, then the risk of infection could be higher. But as I said, not a significant amount of clinical evidence about that. But it's also important that women and girls have accurate information, that we have accurate information to provide to them, because actually you find there are myths as well abounding. So, for example, there's a lack of distinction between menstrual disorders and those conditions that could be associated with hygiene behaviours, which means that we may not be giving the correct advice and support to women. And I think it's been made very clear this evening that we're not just talking about physical health, but we're also talking about social and mental well-being. And if we consider health as this broader definition, then certainly the impacts are significant. So what can we do? I mean, as Rose ended on her talk, we have to break this chain of silence. The taboos, which mean that women can't speak out, the gender inequity, which means that they're not involved in decision-making, and the lack of information and awareness both to women and girls and to men and boys and to development professionals, mean that there's a lack on both the demand side and the supply side. And this leads to the lack of access to services for menstrual hygiene. So I would concur with Rose. The first step is really breaking the silence and not just encouraging women and girls to talk about this, but also men and boys. And when we've had this sort of event, we find men are very willing and interested to talk about this too. So just to set out what we mean by good menstrual hygiene, what that requires. As I said, it's not only about facilities, it's about having appropriate and affordable materials, it's about information, and we also need to consider the disposal of materials. And again, as we've seen tonight, there's a role for different sectors to play in this. There are clear links with WASH, clear links with health and education and gender empowerment. And there's also a role for the private sector, both as employers to ensure that menstrual hygiene facilities are available at work so women can lead healthy and productive lives, and also as providers of services. We need to engage with them more. But just to talk a little bit more about the social protection sector, we also really need to think about women and girls in more marginalised and vulnerable circumstances. So if we think about women and girls with disabilities, those with HIV, AIDS, those who have undergone female genital cutting or fistula, if we think about women and girls in disaster scenarios, or those living on the street, then they certainly have additional needs and face additional challenges and require further support. So we need to work together with those agencies who can reach out to them and engage women and girls in those situations as well. So we amassed an awful amount of information, but we also noticed that there were some further information gaps, and these are just a few that we hope work together with us on. But it's actually very encouraging to note that there's so much happening on this now. And I think this quote really just sums up where we want to get to with menstrual hygiene and tackling this. This is always going to be something that women and girls have to cope with, but we just want to make it the normal part of everyday life, not something that brings everyday life to a standstill. So I'd like to just once again thank everybody who contributed to the resource book. And we do have some copies downstairs on flash drive to share with you, but you can also download it at the WaterAid website, and do contact us with any thoughts, further information, or let us know what you're doing. Thank you.